Hello world, this is Craig. One of the things that I do when I'm not flying is I review the sectionals and just make sure that I understand where everything came from on that sectional. And usually I just pick a particular quadrant and go through that quadrant and make sure that all the symbols make sense. So when I was doing this, I came across some interesting features regarding the highest obstacle or the highest elevation in a particular quadrant. So here's a quadrant and we can see the elevation figures. This 4,400 feet with the larger dot size and the heavier font is the highest natural elevation in that quadrant. We can see just on the other side of the quadrant tick line is a peak that's 4,622, and it has the same dot size, same font size, and so it's the highest natural elevation in that quadrant. And you can compare that to a typical elevation in a quadrant, the 4,288 feet. And you can notice the dot size is much smaller and the font is much smaller. So when I have a question about the sectional, the two things that I go to, the first is the Aeronautical Chart User's Guide. Fantastic guide that'll tell you almost everything that you need to know about the sectional. And the second thing I go to is the sectional, aeronautical, and VFR terminal area charts. It's not as user-friendly in terms of reading it. This is prepared by the Interagency Air Cartographic Committee, the IACC. So this isn't as user-friendly, but it does have more detail than the user guide. For example, here on page A17, it gives us the details of how they show spot elevations. So if we look at the text and the dot size for elevations, if it's just a regular elevation, the dot size is 0.025 inches in diameter and it uses 6-point font. If it's the highest elevation in the general area, in this case the quadrant, the dot size is 0.040 inch and increases to a 7-point font. If it's highest in the entire chart, the dot size is still 0.040 inches, but the font size goes up to 8-point. So that's where my question came. Dot size and the font size for natural features or terrain is well specified. Let's look at the font size for obstacles, so for man-made features that are more than 200 feet tall. We can see kind of a mismatch. Here's an obstacle height that MSL is 2,246, and we can see that's in a very, very heavy font. Here's one just adjacent that is 2,488 that's in a lighter font. Well, does it have anything to do with it being under construction? It has a UC, which means it's under construction, but we can see on the left-hand side there's a 2,235-foot tower that's also under construction, but it's in the lighter font. Well, does it have to do with the highest obstacle in this quadrant? Well, the highest obstacle in this quadrant is actually the 2,536 MSL tower at the top here by the town of Harrington. And it's not in the heavier font. So if you look at these elevations of the obstacles, there doesn't seem to be a rhyme or reason as to the size of the font or the weight of the font. If you go through and look at the cartographer's manual, you look at the user's guide, it's actually silent on these things. It doesn't say anything about the height of obstacles having different weights. So I wrote a note to the FAA and asked, why are these in different fonts? What's the policy on font weight and font size for obstacles? And the answer was very interesting. The FAA was very gracious. They gave a very clear answer. At this point in time, and for the next 10 years or whatever, these maps are still done through a photographic process and they're still hand updated. So when a tower is reported, it has to be added to the sectional manually. Basically, it's, as I understand, it's just a font that is printed out and taped to the sectional. This is then photographed a couple of times through various processes to get it to the final form. And in some cases, the fonts just did not match. And so over a period of time, this created a slight mismatch in the fonts. So the upshot is that for heights of obstacles shown on the sectional, any difference in the weight of the font, or the size of the font, or the font itself is purely unintentional. Okay, well, that was just something that I came across, I thought was interesting, I wanted to share it with you. Remember, I'm not a CFI, so think for yourself, do your own investigation, get these manuals, do your own studying, and use your common sense. Okay, well, I hope this was interesting, and thanks for watching. Bye.